Carl.
Carl.
Carl Grimes was a character in The Walking Dead that seemed untouchable. The Walking Dead followed the story of the Grimes family, starting with Rick waking from the hospital and doing everything he could to reunite with his family. As the years passed by and we started seeing Carl as an actual character instead of a kid growing up in the apocalypse, Chandler Riggs really started coming into his own as both an actor and as Carl Grimes. It seemed inevitable that Rick would someday pass the torch to Carl as the show's leading man, whether that be by Rick's death or just a switch in perspective. Carl was set up not only to survive in this apocalyptic world, but become a leader in it, much like his father was. Whatever challenges he had to overcome as a child growing up in the apocalypse would only make him a stronger man and leader. This sounds very familiar to a version of Carl Grimes we got, the comic version that is, but very different from the show version of Carl, whose time was cut far, far too short. In this video, I'm going to go over the version of Carl we got in the show from beginning to end, the reasons why I think Carl's death was a mistake, and where I think Carl would be if he was still in the show today. In Season 1, Carl is basically in the same boat as Carol when it comes to screen time, meaning they both got very little. Chandler Riggs was the same age as I was when I was watching when he started filming the show, so there were a lot of rules about screen time and hours you're able to work when you're underage, so in Season 1 he's little more than a plot device to cause more tension between Rick and Shane. Carl continues this role in Season 2, but he also gets a fair bit of scenes on his own. Mostly because Lori is an incredibly irresponsible mother and lets her son roam wherever during the zombie apocalypse. I mean, you'd think that she'd be taking better care of him after he was literally shot, but every parenting style is different, I suppose. Lori gets a lot of hate, and some of it is warranted for sure, but Rick is also his father, and he wasn't really watching him either. Granted, Rick had a bit more on his plate than Lori did, but I think Rick still deserves a bit of blame when it comes to parenting Carl, especially when we get to later seasons, but more on that later. Carl is curious about the world, as every kid is at his age, but Carl's not growing up in our world. There's far more dangers to be aware of, but Carl's a naive kid. He wants to go and explore the woods, and while he knows that there's dangers, he's just a kid and he just wants to explore. This doesn't stop Rick and Shane to try and help Carl adapt to this new world. Shane likes to take the fatherly approach to Carl for a lot of different reasons, but Carl always remembers Shane's training. He even uses his training in order to kill Shane when he's turned into a walker, which was a pivotal moment for both the show and the development of Carl. Ever since Carl shot Shane, a switch clicked on in his brain. He realized how terrible and unforgiving the world is. We see this time and time again, and in Season 3, Carl is not your ordinary kid anymore. He's already being hardened by the world around him and the things he has to go through. He watched his mother die, had to kill a man that he looked up to, and witnessed the events unfold around the prison, like Herschel getting his leg cut off. Of course, this doesn't help when Carl's main role model is Rick, who is a loving father, but is also the leader of a large group, so Rick has to make some of the tough decisions that others can't. Because Rick is Carl's main role model, Carl really can't tell right from wrong at this point in the show. A kid is surrendering his gun and begging for his life. Well, according to Rick, the people they're facing are the bad guys, so Carl kills this unarmed kid, thinking that it's the right thing to do. Herschel witnesses this, knowing that Carl is heading down a very dark path, because it's the same path that his father's on as well. Herschel then chooses to mentor Rick, which will in effect trickle down to Carl, and it does, until the world proves to be unforgiving once again, leaving the prison in ashes, Herschel a dead man, and Rick and Carl on the run. This is where we really start to see Carl become his own character. Rick is severely injured, and it's up to Carl to find supplies and food all on his own. This episode really felt like a glimpse into the future of the show. A future where Rick is no longer around, and it's up to Carl to provide for himself and the community as a whole. Though Carl still is a kid, so when he sees a giant tub of pudding, he's gonna sit on the roof and eat that pudding. Luckily for Carl, Rick isn't gone, and now Michonne has joined back with them. And Carl gets to see some sense of family once again. This doesn't last for long, as the group is cornered by the Claimers. If it weren't for Rick, terrible things would have happened to Carl, but he witnesses his father take revenge. This revenge that he witnesses changes Carl yet again, seeing his father kill a man in such a brutal manner, but also how far gone this world has become. Their luck doesn't seem to stretch that far after the Claimers, as they are all captured and almost killed in Terminus, an event that hardens everyone, Carl especially. When the group arrives at Alexandria, we get to see how different Carl is from the kids who have grown up there. Carl calls everyone there weak, and he's right. But his time at Alexandria also allows Carl to live life as a semi-normal teenager. He gets to have his first girlfriend and schoolyard bully, who eventually takes an eye from him, but this doesn't break Carl. When the group runs into Negan, Carl has seen and been through so much to be scared. Part of this is a bit of naivety because obviously Rick is scared to death, but Carl has only seen his father act with aggression and confidence. Never has he seen his father been shaken and scared. This is truly where Carl and Rick start branching paths. Rick bows down to Negan, hoping to spare everyone else. Carl has grown up knowing nothing but retribution for the fallen, so he takes matters into his own hands when trying to deal with Negan. Negan sees that Carl won't be broken, but he also sees a kid who's been hardened by the apocalypse. Sure, Negan intimidates Carl, but he also respects him. Because of this respect, Carl is able to see Negan in a different light than Rick and the rest of the group. Carl understands and matures so much in seasons 7 and 8 that no one else really does. He can see things from both sides. He can see more than just black and white like Rick and Negan. And because of this, Carl starts envisioning a future for the world, a future of peace among all communities. Carl takes this peaceful mindset with him on his journey in season 8, choosing to help Sadiq rather than kill him, which is a far cry from the boy who killed someone in season 3. Ultimately, this outlook is what leads to Carl's downfall, but not before he has a lasting effect on both Rick and Negan. People can be upset about Rick sparing Negan all they want, but if they look at it from Carl's perspective, it makes all the sense in the world that Rick wouldn't kill Negan. Now, something I think all fans can agree on is that Carl's death was a grave mistake made by the showrunners. I know I heard rumors about him being fired from the show, but I don't know, and I don't really care to look into that because if he was fired, then that's just going to piss me off even more. Everyone knows that Carl's death was a mistake in the story. Carl doesn't die in the comics, and I'd really love to see a world where they never killed Carl off. I have to imagine that Carl's death was one of the reasons that Andrew Lincoln stepped away as Rick. Of course, there's no proof of that anywhere, but I'm almost positive it was one of the reasons why he decided to leave the show. I wonder if in this hypothetical world where Carl was never killed off, if Andrew Lincoln decided to stay on the show so that way he could eventually pass the torch to Carl as the leader. We'll of course never know the answer, but if Andrew Lincoln was destined to leave the show in season 9, then killing Carl in season 8 was the absolute wrong decision. Chandler Riggs' Carl could have absolutely led the show with Rick absent. Would it have been different? Yes. Would we have missed Rick? Yes, of course we would, but the show wouldn't have felt nearly as empty as it did if Carl was still around. We could have had Carl as this young leader with people like Daryl and Maggie and Negan to coach him through how to be a leader like his father was. Sure, we have Judith, and she's a great character, and the actress who plays her does a great job, but it's not the same, and it never could be. We got Henry to replace Carl's comic storyline, which I thought was handled pretty well, but I also couldn't help but wonder how this storyline would have played out if Carl was in Henry's shoes. There's just so much missed opportunity and wasted potential that I always come back and wonder what the show would have been like if Carl was in charge. If Carl was still in the show today, then I think of course he would be the show's leading role. If not leading, then he would just be a step below Daryl. Carl could view the Commonwealth exactly the same as Rick viewed Alexandria when they first arrived, and this would be a great callback to his father and those moments in the series. With Carl's vision for the future, he would be able to see what that looked like and how well it was going, only for there to be bumps in the road with the Whisperers and now the Commonwealth. But Carl would be older and more mature to becoming a leader in his own right. He could have differed from his comic storyline and become a new moral compass for the show, killing only when he saw necessary and doing what's best for his people. I thought that Lydia was a very captivating character in seasons 9 and 10, but in season 11 she's had very little to do. But if Carl was around and their romance was still going on, she'd have a lot more screen time and time to develop more of her own character. Plus, I can totally see Carl and Lydia being a couple that the audiences want to see more of. In the Commonwealth, Sebastian would be a great foil to Carl in the same way Ron was at Alexandria, but Carl wouldn't put up with nearly as much shit now as he did back then. As much as I love The Walking Dead and how great I think season 11 has been in particular, there's still a Grimes-shaped hole in the show that Judith can't fulfill for a multitude of reasons, and with Rick being gone for as long as he's been gone, there's just always felt like there was something missing. and that something missing is Carl Grimes. What are your thoughts on Carl? When I was watching the show, I never really cared too much for Carl until he was gone. Kinda, you don't know what you have until it's gone type of character. But now he's a character that almost constantly crosses my mind. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like and subscribe for more Walking Dead content. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.